The Mediterranean Bronze Age is undeniably one of the most interesting periods in all of human history. The era owes part of its allure to a vague similarity to our own time. From the Mycenaean and Minoan Greeks in the west, to the ancient Mesopotamian kingdoms of Babylon and Assyria in the east, the Bronze Age saw the development of a complex multipolar system of highly organized states. Although rivals for influence and power, these kingdoms also depended on one another for the crucial trade resources needed to keep civilization going. Two of the heavyweight monarchies during the later Bronze Age were Egypt's New Kingdom and the Hittite Empire. As the 13th century BC began, these two military powerhouses fought for hegemony over the rich lands of Syria. This clash of titans eventually culminated in the first battle in all history to be recorded in detail, the Battle of Kadesh. We don't know if the Egyptian pharaohs used their headdresses to cover their bald spots, but we know that the sponsor of this video, Keeps, wants to help you with that problem. 2 out of 3 guys will experience some kind of hair loss or male pattern baldness by the time they're 35, and Keeps is your best option to prevent hair loss. It happened to the main historian of the channel, and although it's too late for him, it's not too late for you. He didn't act on time, but that shouldn't be the case for you, as Keeps allows you to get treated from home. As thanks to Keeps, you can avoid an awkward visit to the doctor, and your hair loss medication can be delivered to your home. Keeps offers generic versions of 2 FDA-approved hair loss products. You'll be surprised by the price. Remember, prevention is the key in these matters. Keeps treatments usually take between 4 to 6 months to see results, so it's important to act fast. The sooner you start using Keeps, the more hair you'll save. Keeps has more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors. Hundreds of thousands of men trust Keeps for their hair loss prevention medication. If you're ready to act and prevent hair loss, go to keeps.com/kings or click the link in the description to receive 50% off your first order. Syria, during the late Bronze Age, served as the overflowing entrepot of the interconnected ancient Near Eastern world. Trading vessels from across the Aegean docked at thriving port cities such as Ugarit, swelling their markets with wares, including ivory, textiles, food, timber, as well as 2 components of bronze itself, tin and copper. Land trade routes snaked throughout the Middle East and distributed these wares, returning with exotic Eastern materials such as the mystical lapis lazuli. Complementing a flourishing commerce, the region was itself blessed with a great agricultural fertility and wealth of natural resources. This bounty, together with Syria's vast array of squabbling city-states and small kingdoms, rendered the region vulnerable to surrounding powers. In the 15th century BC, the 2 major predators fighting for control over the resources of Syria were Egypt's militaristic New Kingdom and the Kingdom of Mitanni. Having only recently cast off the yoke of the Asiatic Hyksos, Egypt's new rulers sought to create a strategic buffer of vassals to prevent such an occupation from happening again. After generations of internecine warfare, Mitanni, under threat from a dynamic new force in Anatolia and this new Egyptian empire, finally concluded a lasting peace in around 1420 BC. This era of tranquility and brotherhood between great powers marked the apex of the late Bronze Age, especially for the Pharaonic Empire. Vast tribute from Egypt's Canaanite vassal states poured into Memphis's coffers and flooded the kingdom in gold, while trade routes functioned unimpeded by warfare. Such prosperity, however, was not to last. A few generations after the Concordat, in roughly 1344, the growing threat on Mitanni's northwestern frontier finally made its move. Led by the warlike usurper king Suppiluliuma I, this budding Hittite empire burst forth from its rough Anatolian heartland astride great war chariots and launched 2 lightning wars of conquest against Mitanni. These conflicts culminated in the sack of the Mitanni capital and the kingdom's final destruction. Crucially, the Hittites intruded in Syria as part of their attacks, usurping the strategically vital city of Kadesh and pushing Egypt's control south. This external threat came at a particularly inopportune time for the dominion of the pharaohs. The contentious reign of the so-called heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, followed by the weakness of his son Tutankhamun and the subsequent fall of the 18th dynasty, ensured Egypt was distracted at home for many years. All the while, the Hittites consolidated power in Syria and flipped the Nile realm's vassals to their allegiance. That status quo soon changed once more with the advent of yet another line of Nilotic monarchs. Seti I of the 19th dynasty personally led Egyptian armies into Asia for the first time in decades, asserting pharaonic imperial authority, recapturing the traitorous vassals of Kadesh and Amurru, and even defeating a Hittite force. Unfortunately for Seti, however, he proved unable to maintain tight control over territories so distant from the center of his authority, and eventually concluded peace. By the time of Seti's death in 1279 BC, both Amurru and Kadesh had once more fallen under the Hittite aegis. Seti was succeeded by his prodigious son, Ramses II. Egypt's new monarch first dealt with Sheridan pirates and nomads on his western frontier, before turning his attention to Canaan. Understanding the unsuitability of Thebes as a royal seat when conducting military expeditions in Asia, Ramses II built an entirely new capital on the eastern Nile Delta, which he ever so humbly renamed Pi-Ramses, the House of Ramses. The new capital served as a clear statement that he fully intended to reassert the authority of the Twin Crown on Canaan. The sequence of events that triggered Egypt's direct intervention in Syria is obscure in our records. However, it is likely that Amurru, playing the dangerous game of vassal politics, again changed sides and swore allegiance to Egypt. In the fourth year of his reign, 1275, Ramses II marched his army north to secure the subject state and make a bold statement of intent to the vile Hatti. The pharaoh returned to Pi-Ramses at the conclusion of the relatively quiet campaigning season, ready for a climactic conflict in the next year. The Hittites had been fighting internecine skirmishes in the north, east and west of their realm for years, and that had weakened their response. Matters, however, had calmed by the mid-1270s. So, in the winter of 1275, King Muwatalli II levied warriors from across the territories he controlled and hired mercenaries, and in doing so, assembled the greatest army in the history of the Hittite Empire. In 1274, Muwatalli and Ramses both led their armies into Syria, where they encountered one another near the city of Kadesh. Before we detail the fascinating clash of these late Bronze Age heavyweights, we must first detail the armies with which they went to battle. In contrast to the classical and medieval eras of history, in which infantry, cavalry and iron weapons were the norm in warfare, Bronze Age warfare was very different. It was marked by two standout features. Firstly, bronze itself, an alloy of tin and copper used to forge the tools, weapons and armor of the era. Secondly, horse-drawn chariots, the elite mounted force of the age. The pharaonic army of Ramses II utilized incredibly versatile chariots, whose deadliest attributes were speed and maneuverability. These vehicles appeared lightweight and even fragile at first glance, but were in reality reliable and robust. Much like the later forces of light cavalry horse archers employed by civilizations such as the Huns and Mongols, Egyptian chariots were similarly designed to turn, wheel and loose rains of deadly arrows into the enemy ranks while avoiding a grueling melee. When we look at the raw numbers for any given battle, it's common to split the armies into different troop types, infantry and cavalry for example. However, this disguises the tactical flexibility of Ramses's chariot corps. Rather than serving in one large block, the aristocratic charioteers of the new kingdom's great empire were instead divided among the infantry regiments to create a combined arms military force. Overall, it is likely that the pharaoh mustered around 2,000 chariots, manned by 4,000 men for the campaign of 1274 BC. While the dashing superstars of the age were these charioteers, the true workhorses of Egypt's well-oiled military remained its ever-reliable infantry formations. During Ramses's Kadesh campaign, the army's 16,000 foot troops, raised with the aid of Egypt's famously stringent bureaucracy, were arrayed in divisions raised locally and named after a local god. These were Amun, Ra, Ta and Set, each possessing 4,000 infantry and an accompanying 500 chariots. Critics, both ancient and modern, have criticized Ramesses for dividing his army in such a way, but the value of being able to march without depleting the land of supplies and pursuing many tactical objectives simultaneously made it worth the risk. As for the infantry themselves, experienced professionals known as menfit would form the front ranks, while raw recruits or nefru made up the rear and reserves. Foreigners or mercenaries, including Canaanites, Libyans, Sherdans, and particularly Nubian archers, also served in the pharaoh's army. We know far less about Muwatalli's army than we do about that of Ramesses, but there are cogent details we can piece together. Most notable were the brutal Hittite chariots. In contrast to the vehicles of their Egyptian enemies, these vehicles were far heavier, clearly built for weight and power on the charge. With a centrally balanced axle and a three-man crew wielding large thrusting spears, Hittite chariots focused on smashing into masses of enemy infantry and breaking them apart by force. In addition to the Heartland forces raised from Hatti itself, Muwatalli marched to war at the head of troops from 18 allied and vassal states. They included the previously mentioned city-state of Ugarit, Karchemish, subjugated Mitanni, and Azawa, a land on the faraway Aegean coast of Asia Minor. This Hittite army seems to have slightly outnumbered its southern foe, counting around 15,000 infantry and 10,000 charioteers. Again, in contrast to Egypt, Muwatalli's forces were indeed focused on the shock chariot assault as their primary tool for achieving victory. On the 9th day of the 3rd month of 1274's summer season, sometime in late May, Pharaoh Ramesses was encamped with his vanguard Amun division in hill country 1 day's march south of Kadesh. Half a day behind Amun marched the Ra division, followed by Ta and Set half a day each further south still. Shortly after daybreak, Ramesses broke camp and marched north along the east bank of the Orontes before fording the river near Ribla. This took several hours, and it was at this point that the army captured 2 Shesu Bedouin nomads and brought them into the pharaoh's august presence. According to Egyptian sources, when pressed for information, these seemingly innocuous cattle herders told Ramesses that the fallen one of Hatti is in the land of Caleb to the north of Tunip. For the Egyptians, this news was very welcome. They had apparently arrived at Kadesh first, and therefore had complete control over the battlefield, while the Hittites languished in fear days away. However, it is likely that these informants were in fact sent by the cunning Muwatalli to mislead the pharaoh. As unknown to him, the Hittites were in fact very close at hand. As yet unaware of his dire peril, Ramesses pushed the Amun division onto Kadesh, where it constructed a camp equipped with a defensive perimeter and embankments with soldiers' shields placed around the top for additional protection. The very center of the camp contained a shrine to the god Amun and the pharaoh's royal pavilion. Scouts were dispatched to reconnoiter the surrounding land late in the day, and one of them swiftly returned with something curious. 2 prisoners had been lurking suspiciously near the Egyptian encampment. Initially, these men refused to respond to the pharaoh's questions. However, after being given a sound beating, they gave up information that was both invaluable and terrifying in equal measure. Apparently in confusion, Ramesses asked, "What are you?" attempting to ascertain who had sent them. They admitted to being sent by Muwatalli. Ramesses' heart would have dropped. In truth, the Hittites were shrouded behind a nearby mound to the northeast at Old Kadesh, furnished with their infantry and their chariotry carrying their weapons of warfare, and are more numerous than the sand of the riverbanks. To Ramesses' credit, his reaction seems to have not been one of panic or over-hasty, but efficiency and eagerness to remedy his own mistake in a comprehensive manner. He also seems to have owned that mistake, as the Egyptian sources do not attempt to conceal it. Regardless, the pharaoh immediately sent senior officials south in order to hurry the other 3 divisions of Ra, Tar and Set to Kadesh at top speed. Another speculative messenger was also sent north to summon a 5th division of foreign troops who might have been able to help the Ne'arin. South of Ramesses' camp, Ra crossed the Orontes and began trudging towards their lord's camp, about 7 miles north, in haste. At the same time, by Old Kadesh, Muwatalli received reports that an Egyptian army of some size had closed in. He was, however, as of yet unsure where exactly the pharaoh was, or the true size of his enemy's forces. Based on what happened next, it is assumed that the Hittite monarch sent a 500-strong chariot contingent south as a reconnaissance in force, instructed to gather as much information as possible. While the 5,000 troops of Ra made for Ramesses' camp, Muwatalli's substantial chariot scouting force skirted the hill on which Kadesh was built and then crossed the Orontes, emerging to the right of Ra's desperately exposed marching column. The heavy Hittite chariots improvised, and now, with little other option, launched a direct charge at the Egyptian reinforcement division. Utterly taken aback, the Egyptian chariots screening Ra's right flank were swept away. The unprotected infantry failed to assume formation and immediately broke apart. Rather than staying to destroy Ra, which, given a concerted Hittite attempt, almost certainly could have been done, the assaulting chariots simply carved through the column and emerged from the other side. Egyptian warriors, probably a greater portion of the untested Nefru, fled to all points of the compass, but it's clear that the chariots and some Menfit veterans made an orderly withdrawal in Ramesses' direction. Thus ensued a race against time, swift Egyptian chariots seeking to warn their pharaoh of the danger versus lumbering Hittite vehicles on the attack. Fresh from their near destruction of the unfortunate Ra division just minutes earlier, the Hittites swept north in an arc and beelined directly at the western side of the pharaoh's camp. The camp itself, having received the withdrawing chariots and able to see the incoming dust cloud, was abuzz with panicked activity. Amun division soldiers and Ramesses' guard armed themselves and rushed to the defense. The pharaoh's family members hurried to the other side of the camp. Then the Hittites struck, smashing straight through the shield wall and beginning a melee. Although more Egyptian soldiers panicked, ran or died where they stood, the obstructive tents, vast wealth stores, and other camp distractions were slowing and disorienting the Hittite assault. Many charioteers, no doubt believing victory had been achieved, turned to looting and their momentum died. In turn, the Egyptian infantry turned about and advanced slowly, pulling Hittite chariot crews out of their now impotent vehicles and dispatching them with the famously arced Kopesh blade. Every advantage of a chariot charge was gone. Within the royal pavilion, and bedecked in a long coat of armor, Ramesses II donned the Kopesh war crown of the pharaohs and mounted the royal chariot, pulled by his own personal steeds, Victory in Thebes and Beloved of Amun. With a command to Mena, his own chariot driver, the pharaoh gathered whatever of the Amun and Ra chariotry remained and led it out of the camp by the eastern approach. With Ramesses at their head, the Egyptians swept northwest and prepared to confront the Hittites, chariot for chariot. At their divine king's signal, the Egyptian chariots swooped down upon the numerically greater enemy throng at rapid speed, unleashing arrow volleys and wheeling about to do so again and again. All the while, the Hittites failed to react. As a Ramesside source known as the Bulletin tells us, then His Majesty entered into the host of the Hatti enemies, His Majesty being like Set the Great of strength, and like Sekhmet at the moment of her raging, and His Majesty killed the entire host of the wretched fallen one of Hatti. The disordered Hittite formation shattered just as the Ra division had, Hatti warriors fleeing desperately, just as Ramesses pressed the counterattack with greater force. A greater portion of the Anatolian Empire's 500 chariots lay broken on the field, along with their riders, and Egyptian infantry followed up to finish the job with clinical brutality. Muwatalli, observing this disaster from a vantage near Kadesh, was accompanied only by his elite charioteers and vassal rulers. But realizing he had to act now, the Hittite king formed them up and prepared to make his own attack. Muwatalli had his vassals cross the Orontes and launch an attack against the eastern part of the now almost undefended Egyptian camp. Ramesses and his chariots were elsewhere, and it seemed that the Hittites were about to flip the battle once more. However, at the moment of catastrophe and the possible capture of the pharaoh's family, the Na'arin division arrived from the north like agents of the Egyptian gods themselves and engaged the newly arrived Hittite force. As a grateful Ramses would later have inscribed on his mortuary temple at Thebes, the Na'arin broke into the host of the wretched fallen one of Hatti as they were entering the camp of Pharaoh, and the servants of his majesty killed them. Muwatalli's chariot force also routed back across the Orontes, leaving behind many destroyed vehicles as they went. Ramses drew back into the ruin of his camp to rest. Later that day, the Ta division arrived from the south, together with a number of shamed Ra and Amun troops who had fled during the fighting. The next day, Ramses lined up those troops of Amun and Ra whose bravery had been found wanting on the plains outside Kadesh. The pharaoh had them all executed as punishment for their transgression, almost certainly in full view of Muwatalli. The psychological impact of this fearful display and the extensive losses in men and morale among the Hittite king's chariot forces led him to propose a truce to the Egyptians. Ramses, who had also taken substantial losses in the inconclusive battle, accepted. Pharaonic sources attempted to magnify Ramses's tactical triumphs during the Battle of Kadesh, but it cannot be said to be anything other than a strategic disaster for the new kingdom. Weakened as his army had been by the clash with the Hittites, the pharaoh was forced to withdraw back to Egypt. In his wake came Muwatalli, who, tailing Ramses, occupied the province of Upay. Worse still, the perceived failure of Egypt's campaign sparked a great anti-Egyptian revolt throughout Canaan. Ramses II, later to be known as Ramses the Great, fought a number of further campaigns in Canaan and Syria during the subsequent years of his reign, with the aim of recovering territories lost in the post-Kadesh revolts. However, the crucial vassals of Kadesh and Amurru would remain in Hittite hands permanently. 16 years after the Battle of Kadesh, Ramses concluded the world's earliest surviving peace treaty with Muwatalli's successor, Muwatalli III. The two allied kingdoms remained at peace until the notorious Bronze Age collapse, when the entire civilization of the Near East came to a chaotic end. We'll talk more about the Bronze Age in our future videos, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patron supporters and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.